Hello there, my name is Benjamin Moeller. I'm a recent graduate from the University of Arizona in Tucson, and this is a pre-recording of a lecture that I will be giving at the annual meeting of the Society of Vertebrate Paleontology taking place in Minneapolis. This talk is going to be delivered on October 30th at 11:30 to 11:45, so we only get 15 minutes for these talks. I'm going to go a little bit over that because this is a pre-recording, and I don't have to be concerned about the next person in line here. But this is still going to be a pretty brief conversation. I have a lot of detail written out on the actual slides. You are, of course, because this is a recording, able to pause at any time if you'd like to read any of these slides more in depth before hitting play to continue. And this is a presentation on fossil repositories and the kind of challenges that those that are in the region that I live and work in are facing, particularly because of climate change. And fossil collections exist, of course, so that fossils can be kept safe for future generations, not just to be able to enjoy them, but to do research on the same materials that those of us in the present day have, but those in the future will be able to possibly verify, possibly contest the conclusions that we come to, because they will have new ideas, better methods, and better technology. So it's important that these collections are kept stable for decades, if not centuries, into the future. And because we know that the climate is changing and that the biggest threats to fossil repositories are mostly climate-related disasters. These are floods, hurricanes, fires, earthquakes. Earthquakes are not a climate-related disaster, but you get what I mean. It's important that we look to the future and we take in the information that we have about how the climate is going to change so that we can plan accordingly. Anytime I'm talking about climate change to an audience, I always have to hit this point. This is work that has to be done at some point. If we want these things to continue to exist into the future, we have to be building in climate resiliency into everything that we do. And it's a lot easier to do this now than it will be in 10 years. It's a lot less costly to do it now than it will be in 10 years. So the present is always the perfect time to be thinking about these things. So the title of this talk is Animal, Environmental, and Health Safety Challenges Facing Paleontological Collections in Southern Arizona and How They Inform Climate-Calibrated Roadmaps for Fossil Repositories. So first, we're going to define what counts as Southern Arizona. There are geographical, geopolitical, and sort of ecoregion definitions of what counts as north and south in the state. We're particularly talking about this area, which both includes the Borderlands region as well as the Phoenix metro area. And these are, it's a summary map of different repositories in the state holding public collections. So here around Tucson, we've got the University of Arizona. In the Phoenix metro, Arizona State and the Arizona Museum of Natural History both have public collections. Up north, Petrified Forest National Park has many, many fossils, as well as the Museum of Northern Arizona and a collection on campus at NAU. So the northern region has a routine fire regime. It's part of the ecology up there. It's higher elevation, higher precipitation. There's an annual snowpack, and they have lower temperatures. Again, these forests, it's a mix of ponderosa, aspen, and in other areas, juniper and oak, or just open grass fields. Wildfires are more common and more routine on this area. This is the Mogollon Rim and the Colorado Plateau up there. So these areas are fire adapted, whereas here in the south, this is typically what you think of when you think of Arizona, where the low elevation deserts with low precipitation, very rare snowfall, and much higher temperatures. Our canopies are made of mesquite, palo verde, ironwood, creosote, saguaro, things that are not adapted for routine fires. So keep that in mind because that's one of the biggest climate threats that fossils in this area face. And because I'm going to be producing a whole lot of problems in this presentation that collections in the area face, I want to make sure I'm not arguing for these fossils to be removed and sent somewhere else. Because all things considered, we have a few really big advantages to keeping fossils here. Fossils in this region are actually quite safe because we have very low humidity, year-round low humidity. Whereas a lot of other areas will have either year-round high humidity or times when humidity peaks and then recedes. Moisture is one of the biggest threats towards fossils in collections. There's a lot of climate control that needs to go into fossil collections to keep fossils from absorbing moisture from the air. There are infections called pyrite disease that can precipitate from fossils that are kept at too high of humidity. So the fact that we have low humidity is a big mark in our favor. We also have comparative regional geological stability compared to other areas in the United States that fossils from U.S. public lands could be sent. The Pacific Coast, for example, has earthquakes. Fires are much more routine there than they are in southern Arizona. There's rare volcanism on the Pacific Coast, but it's not really something people have to worry about. The eastern seaboard has very high humidity, the seaboard and up on the Gulf. They also experience worsening hurricanes and floods. Both are big threats towards fossil collections. The Pacific Coast region and the eastern seaboard are both areas that Arizona fossils have been sent to before. Particularly on the eastern seaboard, D.C. and New York City are both places that have fossils from Arizona. And to be quite frank, they are safer here than they are in those areas if we're talking about these kinds of aspects. The Plains region is affected by tornadoes. We don't get those here in southern Arizona. And the Rocky Mountain region also has its kind of wildfire regime. There's also a scientific utility in keeping fossils in this area, because it helps supports an ecosystem of local researchers. So having fossils that are local to an area that are accessible to the locals is part of what helps train up students that are able to work in paleontological collections. So allowing that kind of expertise to be homegrown here is part of repairing a tradition of paleontology. And so I'm going to briefly go over what that tradition used to look like here, specifically in the Tucson area in the decades before me. The University of Arizona had a laboratory of paleontology that had over 23,000 specimens across 9,000 plus localities, including Arizona and some of the adjacent areas. This program shuttered in 1996. I was born in 1999, so again, this all predates me by quite a bit. And some of the specimens that were in the UALP collection from New Mexico have been sent back to New Mexico. The remainder were left unstewarded for about 2 decades. The Arizona Sonora Desert Museum is also in this area. They had fieldworked the Turney Ranch Formation. That's a Cretaceous Age formation in this area in the 1990s that was terminated due to cost. And in the time since, some of these collections have been cleaned up, thankfully. The majority of specimens at the University of Arizona are on Tumamoc Hill. These are Pleistocene aged. We have Cretaceous dinosaur material kept in the planetarium on campus, and there are various pieces of Oligocene and Miocene age, mostly mammals, that are in the Gould-Simpson building and other places in kind of the scattered UA campus. The Arizona Sonora Desert Museum has plenty of material from Turney Ranch and Fort Crittenden. Both are local Cretaceous formations, as well as material from the Pleistocene, Pliocene, and possible Miocene from across Arizona. So if you are a researcher and you work on stuff like that, keep in mind that these are fossils that are available for research and they are still kept in the area. If you are at SVP, if you're watching this video on October 30th, and the poster session has not ended yet, you can go to the poster session to learn more about fossil collections in this region, particularly in kind of the Phoenix metro area. My friend and colleague Dr. Cohn is presenting a poster from 4:30 to 6:30. Go check that out. Okay, so what are the top non-financial local challenges? So big picture, the biggest issues that face paleontological collections pretty much anywhere are going to be underfunding and understaffing. And there's been enough said about those topics, and I want to particularly focus on these areas I feel don't get enough attention. So I've identified through my work here in the area 3 particular areas that should be focused on. Animal invaders, the way that they damage infrastructure, particularly electrical wiring and paper data records. Climate change is going to increase intensity and frequency of severe fires. And protocol is needed for radiologically sensitive material and worker safety in climate emergencies. So we'll go to the first one. I've blurred out the pictures so that if you're grossed out by bugs, you can look away for the next 30 to 45 seconds because I'm going to unveil them in 3, 2, 1, bam! There they are. So these are desert subterranean termites, Heterotermes aureus. They have gotten into a fossil collection, eaten through wooden cabinetry, and this substrate that they've made their home into used to be particle cardboard and index cards that were holding specimen record labels. So that's obviously not great. And we also have an issue here with the rodent Neotoma. These are pack rats. pack rats like to overwinter anywhere that is warm and dry, so buildings are a big target for them, including fossil collections. And we have had issues with pack rats getting into facilities, chewing through electrical wiring that is meant for climate monitoring systems. They also leave feces everywhere. And rodent feces can be a vector for hantavirus, so this is also kind of a work safety issue. So these are things that we have issues with here. I think people from collections all over also have issues with rodents and insects. So if you have advice on dealing with these, reach out and let me know. I would love to hear any feedback you have. Local climate change is something that I spend a lot of time thinking about. And here I'm going to showcase a tool created by the University of Maryland. This is an average of 27 different forecasts under a high emission scenario. So in the case that humanity is not able to cut its CO2 emissions or chooses not to cut its CO2 emissions over the coming decades, this is the type of climate change that we are looking at. And by 2080, Tucson's climate is forecast to average 1.9 degrees Celsius warmer and 33.6% wetter in the summer by 2080. This is most similar to the climate of Hermosillo, which is the capital of Sonora, Mexico, the state just to the immediate south of us. And this makes sense because in a situation of global warming, we would expect climate zones to be moving upward in elevation and upward in latitude. So in this case, the more kind of tropical savanna climate that typifies sort of Central America, that's kind of what's moving upward in latitude towards us. So we expect things to get hot, as you would expect, but it also is forecast to get wetter in the summer. And here's some averages of different areas, other cities in Arizona that I know house collections to kind of show how different areas are affected in different ways. Phoenix is going to be quite a bit warmer in the winter, but drier as well in that same time period, whereas Prescott and Flagstaff, these are both in more of the northern ecoregion of the state, higher elevation, will be warmer in the winter as well, but also wetter. And so one of the exacerbating factors of wildfires in this area is not just a hot and dry summer, but you need a warm and wet winter in order to build up kindling for these fires. Fuel is grown in the winter, and then if you have a hot and dry summer immediately afterwards that dries it all out, that's when you have really severe fire conditions. These are all things to keep in mind. If you're from the area and you want resources on what climate change is forecast to look like, here's a bunch of different papers that I read through as part of this, so you can pause and look up these resources. It's also good practice to be testing fossils for radioactivity. I have to give a shout out to my dad here as being the one who kind of got me into this habit. He's given me a small kit. There are lots of very portable, very accessible, very cheap Geiger counters and other kinds of kits that will let you detect whether fossils or anything is radioactive, right? And it's obviously not unheard of that fossils are radioactive. Out west, the Upper Jurassic Morrison Formation is notorious for having very radioactive fossils. And so as part of this, we tested material from the Turney Ranch Formation and found it to emit around 3 microsieverts per hour, which is roughly 10 times typical background radiation levels. There's a little nuclear radiation safety guide on the left to kind of show where it is on the list. This isn't like an emergency level of radiation. It just means that you need to be careful about basically radioactive fossils in enclosed spaces will accumulate radon gas, and it's not exactly over time the risk increases the longer these collections go without being vented. So this is definitely a call if you've got material from the Turney Ranch or really any fossil formation and you're not sure if it's radioactive. It's always a good thing to just go and check, because if you're not checking it and you're not systematically venting that gas, you could be building up something that could be quite hazardous. So these are all the problems that I presented. Let's talk about a roadmap to solutions. I've tried to break things into time periods, things that can be done immediately, things that need to be kind of worked on over time. So in less than a year, it should be possible to conduct a radiological testing of a collections facility. This is something that should be done as part of building management anyway. If it hasn't been, that's definitely something for concern. But you should know what kind of the base level radioactivity of your facility is, and then you can do systematic testing of the fossil collections to see if there's particular deposits whose fossils yield tend to have higher radiation levels. This is also a good period of time to begin to identify high priority specimens for 3D photogrammetric scanning. So one of the only sort of insurance policies we can take out to make sure that at least some aspects of fossil data are kept safe for a long period of time is taking 3D scans and creating 3D models of the fossils. This is not a replacement for the fossils. The fossils still need to be kept safe for scientific testing, but making a 3D model ensures that there's at least a backup of it in case something is destroyed, like in a flood or in a fire. So in less than a year, it should be very doable to identify high-value specimens. This means fossils that are one-of-a-kind, holotypes, type specimens, as well as high-risk specimens, things that are already falling apart, already not in good shape, that would not survive if there was an earthquake or if there was a fire or even just an evacuation of material, something that might not survive transport. So in less than a year, you should be able to identify and begin scanning this stuff. It's more possible than ever. It's cheaper than ever. It's more accessible than ever to take 3D models of fossils. In less than a year, I've taken, I think, around 80 scans, or I've scanned around 80 specimens of different fossils in Southern Arizona collections, public and private. And I've designed exhibitry by learning Unreal Engine at around the same time. So in less than a year, in addition to creating backups of these fossils, an insurance policy, you can also use these for outreach in a very effective way. I've essentially built video game levels that you can run around in and see this stuff in 3D. You can go into the description of this video to check out the Steam page for this project. It's called Shadowbox. Between 1 to 3 years, you should be developing and implementing climate emergency plans if you don't already have them. This is a very important part of worker safety. So not only do you need secure evacuation sites for those high priority specimens, this means working with possibly other repositories, possibly other government buildings in different networks, establishing places that in an emergency I know where we can evacuate these specimens to. But in addition to that, it's important to make sure that workers who work in these collection staff, have their health and safety in mind too. So in events of extreme weather, if there is a heat wave, heat is not really going to impact fossils, but it surely impacts the people who have to work in those collections. Red flag and black flag events refer to times in which it is just too hot to be working, it's dangerous to be doing physical labor, and it's better to keep people inside in air conditioning, low activity. So make sure that you have plans in store in the event of massive heat waves in which productivity needs to be tampered down and people can be kept safe and lie low to sort of ride these things out. This is also a good period of time to review and improve landscape management. Again, anytime I'm talking to an audience about climate change, I try to emphasize that land management is both poor land management practices are one of the biggest causes of climate change, and that positive land management practices are a huge part of the solution. So good practices in this case mean clearing brush from the side of buildings to reduce, again, fire risk. You need to create breaks in your vegetation so that fire, if it does break in one area, doesn't have an easy time spreading from one area to the next. Planting drought-tolerant vegetation in the event that there's a drought. In the event that we have the opposite and there's lots of water, you know where the water is going to flow, so you have flood mitigation as part of your physical landscaping improvements. You can also investigate drought-smart fire suppression systems. At the U of A, there are pipes that will blast sand as a fire suppressant in the event that we're in a drought and we don't have enough water to put fires out. This is a good period of time to review, improve, and expand climate monitoring practices, including humidity and indoor temperature. So again, here in Southern Arizona, we don't really think about indoor humidity as a thing we need to monitor. Now's the time to start implementing that habit because we're going to be increasing humidity and we need to be tracking it to see if it gets worse, to see if it gets hazardous to the fossils that are supposed to be kept safe. And this includes both inside collections vaults, where climate monitoring should always be happening, as well as outside, because again, we're trying to keep workers safe as well. So anywhere in the facility, you should be monitoring temperature and humidity, so that the nexus where these two things meet, high temperature and high humidity, you start hitting your wet bulb temperatures, and those are very, very dangerous to worker health. And in the event that a collection is just in a bad location, it's got bad housing, it needs to be moved somewhere else on your facility, this is the time to be thinking about replacing wooden cabinetry with metal, and if necessary with cabinetry that can vent radon gas. The best place to put a fossil collection is going to be on your first floor spaces. The basement is a bad place because of those subterranean desert termites. Basements aren't really a thing in Arizona anyway, but yeah, first floor with access to a loading dock or a freight elevator so that emergency evacuation can be done quickly of big, heavy crates of material. And in the 3 to 10 year range is where all of these practices, once put into place, are going to start generating data that you can use to adjust and continue monitoring. If you see indoor temperature is increasing, you know that you're going to have to start working on climate retrofitting of that building. If indoor humidity is increasing, you know that it could potentially get to the point where it's impacting the fossils. If there are incidents of animal encroachment, you can see if they're repeating seasonally or annually or biannually. You can note areas that are being targeted over time. And you're also going to see, as the climate changes in a decade or 2 decades or 3 decades, whether new areas are being identified as at risk for fires or floods that were not previous at risk. So that's the gist. That's what I wanted to get across. If you have feedback on anything that I've talked about, and particularly if you work in collections, if you know solutions to some of these problems that I've been bringing up, if you want to discuss solutions, you can send that to my email, benfmuller@arizona.edu. I have lots of people that I would like to thank, way more than I can list at the end of a PowerPoint. And that is essentially the talk. So thank you for listening. Please feel free to send this around, and I will see you next time on whatever I decide to do.